The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz along with my co-host Tony Palmeri. On this edition we're very pleased to welcome back for the second time the Chancellor of University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, Dr. Richard Wells. Welcome, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks for inviting me back.
It's been about a year and a half.
Yeah, came back.
Well, see, we told you we'd have you back. One of the things that we want to discuss, of course, tonight, and probably the biggest topic of our discussion, is going to be the budget cuts that are imminent for UW-Oshkosh as well as the rest of the UW system. And, you know, I just want to say right up front, I'm going to plead some ignorance here on this topic because I don't work in academia. I haven't followed this topic all that much of late. And, you know, so I guess that's good, though, because I'll be coming at it from the same kind of perspective that I think most of the viewing audience will. So we'll let Tony ask the really tough questions, and I'll ask the average, everyday kind of questions. So, you know, the very first thing, obviously some budget cuts are coming. What are you looking at in total proposed cuts for the next school year?
Well, in the UW system, we operate on a biennial budget process, and we're just finishing this biennium now, this most recent 2 years, where we had to cut out $6.7 million over the 2-year period. And now, based at least initially on the budget proposal that the governor put forward for UW-Oshkosh's share of the cut, and I'd like to explain that, to be fair, you know, to the governor. For us, it's about a $2.6 million, and we'll talk a little bit more about what's been added on as it worked through the legislature. But there's a lot of confusion out there sometimes about cutting, and you have some people saying, what are they talking about cutting? They're getting extra money. They're getting more money than they have in this particular fiscal year, which is true. The problem is that the amount of additional money does not cover hardly a fraction of the cost to continue. All of our electrical bills go up in all of our homes. They do in the university as well, or, you know, fuel bills. You know, fringe benefit costs increase as well. And so when you realize what's happened, the way the budget was structured, without getting too, you know, numeric about the whole thing, it basically requires us to cut away from central kind of mission support things to keep our lights on and to keep paying for the increased costs on fringe benefits. So with the governor's budget, we have to figure out, and we've gone through a process to do that, how to cut $2.6 more million out. And if all the versions of the additional cuts that came through the Joint Finance Assembly and the Senate were added on, it'd be another $2.7 million, would in effect double the cuts that we were facing with the governor's budget. So that's the short version of that.
Well, explain to people how UW-Oshkosh handles these cuts.
Well, we have you know, at least from my perspective anyway, and I think a lot of people on campus would agree, some may not, but we try to have a, you know, highly open, inclusive, iterative process. We have criteria and standards that we set up. We've worked very hard on our campus to try to align our mission, you know, what we're there for, with our action initiatives, and make sure our resources are supporting our most mission central kind of priorities. And then we ask every unit to kind of look very carefully at their budget, to address certain budget cutting goals. Then we put them all together, and then we have open forums, and we ask people to respond to what they like about it, to the extent you can like much about budget cutting, what they're concerned about, what they'd like us to try to adjust and fix. Then we go back and readjust it. and then we submit it to the system.
But for the most part, we've avoided massive layoffs. But that might not be the
Yes.
case in the future, correct?
Yes, in this most recent biennium, as well as an estimate of the number of positions that we would have to cut out with the governor's version, governor's 2.6 million more, be about 55 jobs.
Right.
And I'm very proud of our campus because one of our goals is to try to do all that as best we can without laying real human beings off in real jobs. And this time around with the governor's cuts in terms of our planning, we had to lay off 2 people. So out of 55 jobs we've eliminated, only 2 of them were, unfortunately, were cases where individuals were working in those jobs. Now some people say, well, then it can't be too bad.
Exactly.
And I would have to argue that it has more to do with the fact that everyone has been very thoughtful and very careful. And we knew we were going to have budgetary challenges, so we were very careful in not filling certain positions in that type of thing. So, but yes, Tony, the next, if we had to do an additional 2.7 million, then we're at a point where most of the jobs that would be cut out would have people in them.
Right, so that if the state Senate wants to cut much more than the governor.
Well, technically what the state Senate added system-wide was an additional 34 million they wanted to hold back.
All right.
That we would have to go back into the Joint Finance Committee over the biennium and request that that money be given to us. So we have to treat that as if we don't have it.
Right.
We might get it back if the governor doesn't veto this particular provision, then we would have to go back in front of Joint Finance. But when you're setting up your budgeting, as you know, Tony, we've already admitted the over 11,000 students are registered for classes.
Right.
We have contractual obligations to, obviously, our faculty, our teaching academic staff, and we can't wait around for, are you going to give it back to us? Aren't you going to give it back to us?
Correct.
So that causes some real planning problems for us, yes.
Sure, sure.
Well, you know, speaking of the students, Chancellor, how do cuts like this affect the students? What percentage directly impacts the student body?
Well, what we've been able to do is to keep the same number of seats for our 11,000 plus students. I mean, obviously we're a public university and we have a special obligation to be accessible. And so at that level, I think for the most part, our students have been well served. Our faculty have worked extremely hard with the department chairs and the deans under these extraordinary conditions to cut out all the kinds of resources around that, but keep those seats in there. So at that level, that's a good thing. Unfortunately, you know, those seats need to be supported. I mean, our department's equipment budgets and their supply budgets and their travel budgets for field trips and things like that have been very severely cut. So the quality of the experience for the students is being compromised at some level. And I want to be careful. You can still get a hell of an education at UW-Oshkosh.
That's right.
Make no mistake about that. But it really, really affects our ability to do it at the level that our faculty really can. But this next round of cuts, if we had to go as deep as the legislature's version of the budget, there's no way. I mean, I want to always be very careful about not screaming the sky is falling, and particularly put our students in the middle of that and frighten people. But it got so bad this time that in a recent communication I indicated if these cuts went through, we had to do most all of them in the spring. To give a more specific answer to your question, we would have 6,600 fewer seats. That's equivalent to 1,400 fewer full-time equivalent students served, or a 15% reduction in our spring enrollment.
Wow.
And you just can't do that. So.
Oh, go ahead.
What does it do, if anything, to the tuition levels that students pay?
Well, that's the other issue, is that the tuition, that the rate that the regions approved was a 6.9% increase in tuition. Now, that's on top of, over the last couple biennium, roughly a 50% increase in tuition. And whereas we can still point out that our tuition is below the national average, obviously our average income of families is also a bit below the national average. The issue of if you're a student and you're in the middle of your education and you've done some financial planning, you're working typically, particularly our students, a lot of first-generation college, blue-collar students, and you're planning for a certain kind of cost, and all of a sudden, in a matter of months, your costs jump up 17% one year, 16% the next year, 7%. That really causes some real issues and problems for our students.
Sure.
Related to the tuition, you and Chancellor Shepard from
Yes.
UW Green Bay spoke to the Board of Regents on July 7th, I guess it was.
Correct.
And you both gave, you know, a bleak picture. And with all due respect, you don't do bleak very well. I do bleak well. Cheryl does bleak very well.
I don't like doing bleak.
No, you don't like bleak. But did I understand you correctly in your remarks to the Regents? You said that last year, I believe, on our campus, for the first time, the revenue generated from tuition exceeded the revenue coming from the state. Is that correct?
Correct.
So doesn't that mean, in a literal sense, we're not really a public institution anymore?
Well, it means the financing of the educational experience has changed in some pretty dramatic ways, and it's pretty historic for Wisconsin. The quick statistic on that is that $40 million of tuition and fees now come in the UW-Oshkosh budget, and about $39 million comes from the state. And that's because of the consequence of the $250 million reduction in GPR this biennium, and then the increase in the tuition rate. But it's an interesting question, Tony, because you know, you can make that case. You hear a lot of us around the country making that case. But you know, legislators and the governor, for some understandable reasons, believe that the fees that students pay, the tuition and the fees, is part of their public accountability and responsibility. It's a user fee. Some of us like to say it's a tax, but technically it really isn't. And so they would argue that, well, that money you're getting from the students and their parents and others, as well as the taxpayers' money through GPR, is public funding. They would also argue that, you know, the state has for many years, 130 years in our case, put the support in to build the campus, the infrastructure, and all that kind of thing. And so I like to be, I'm a little different from most people on this. I like to be very careful about that, because I really want universities to stay fundamentally, at least like UW-Oshkosh, public and not become private.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the whole idea of a public university was that it was accessible for everyone.
Right, and that's the issue.
If you can make the grades. If you can make the grades, you can get in. We're losing that.
All right, now that I'll agree with you, because the participation rate of the lower income quintile families in Wisconsin is going down rather significantly.
Sure is.
So that makes it less public in that sense. The who goes question, is it truly representative of all the people in the state who have worked hard to meet the standards to get in? Can they still afford it? Can they get in? And the extent that they're not, it's becoming less public in that sense. Yes, absolutely.
And wouldn't you agree that there is a significant strain in Madison that would like to privatize this university system? Aren't we? I mean, it's disturbing, but aren't we slowly getting to that point?
Well, I think, you know,
maybe not so slowly.
I don't want to impute motive to any particular individual or set of individuals or legislators or governor, but I think what happens is that people realize that the UW institutions have supposedly this other revenue stream, tuition and fees. Most of the other public goods in the state, major ones, corrections and K through 12 and so on, do not have tuition and fees to go to.
Right.
So when they're in a squeeze, as we really are, I mean, we have budgetary problems. We have budgetary deficits structurally, and when they're in a squeeze to figure out how to solve it, they're more likely to cut us, not just in Wisconsin. Unfortunately, this is happening in many parts of the country because it gives them some flexibility. So, well, the fees can be raised over here, or universities, you know, more so than these other public goods, can go out and raise private funds, get federal grants and contracts and all that. So that's really what I think in their minds they're thinking. I don't think there are people that are really trying to make the university private in a significant sense of that. But their actions result in it changing in its nature, given that the individual, the private individual, has to pay more for this education. And that's an important question. You know, what should be the balance? There is a lot of private good that an individual receives out of getting an outstanding education from an institution like UW-Oshkosh, but there's a tremendous amount of public good that comes out of that as well.
Absolutely.
And then the final issue around that is that Wisconsin really has to do a lot more work on improving and understanding its financial aid. It has a financial aid program that was built around a low tuition model. And now it's a higher tuition situation with still low financial aid. So that's where you really get at this point about being public and accessible to all people according to their ability to pay.
Cheryl?
Chancellor, you had just said that there's a lot of public good that comes out of university systems like UW-Oshkosh. Can you address that a little bit for us? Because I think that a lot of people in this community, and I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of people tend to look at the university as kind of a pain in the rear and this kind of thing. I know a few of the students have been a pain in the rear for me, but you know, that's not the university system as a whole. So to kind of help people maybe understand how important your institution is to this community, can you maybe give us a shopping list of things that the community as a whole benefits from?
Let's start with our students. Obviously, without playing that card very long, they, in and of themselves, in terms of the tuition and fees they pay and the money they spend on housing and food and entertainment, have an enormous economic impact on the community. They're responsible for many jobs that are created in the community because of the goods and services that they buy. Secondarily, our students, you know, there's still a lot of first-generation college students. A lot of them are from Oshkosh. A lot of them come from working-class families, and they're out there working, partly to pay for these tuition increases. So they fulfill a very important labor need. They're for the most part, they're very good employees. They work hard. They're smart. They're motivated. And so they fulfill a labor need in the community as well. And then as philanthropists, I always say the most consistent and biggest philanthropists in Oshkosh are the UW-Oshkosh students. They give enormous amounts of time and volunteer work and raise all kinds of funds for our local United Way agencies, the Christine Ann Center, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So their benefits far outweigh their cost. They're, you know, for the most part, younger than a typical Oshkoshite, so to speak, but there are a lot of older students as well. And so there are some costs in any community in terms of that age group of you know, 18 to 25-year-olds. They engage in behaviors that make a number of us wonder sometimes as we get older, but sometimes we forget we were that age too. But I'm not in any way excusing or justifying highly inappropriate behavior that you have from anybody, much less some of our students some of the time. But when you really, I think, are objective about it, they're absolutely wonderful. And then the same thing, I think, can be said about the majority of, if not most of, our faculty and staff. They're involved in the community. They serve in the Common Council. They serve in all types of boards and agencies. They volunteer for community events. They share their expertise. So they're a huge presence in the community. And that goes for all our employee groups. I think our classified staff a lot of times are overlooked. They're about 40% or so of our workforce. They're a great group of people. They're great to work with. Most of them live right here in Oshkosh, and they do wonderful things in the community as well. So, and then there's, you know, the entertainment value, the sporting events, the art openings, the musical events. That's one reason that we're trying to do a better job opening up the university, making more and more people feel very comfortable. It's their university. They should get engaged with it more, get involved, you know, use the library, go to the events in the student union and so on. Don't be concerned about being on campus. You know, it's wonderful to be in an environment where there are a lot of different kinds of people on your campus, whether or not they're enrolled as students. So I think there's a lot of ways that case can be made.
Well, and also, if I can just interject here, something else that, another way in which the university does benefit the community, you know, you've got the Small Business Development Center. Right. You guys have you're just gearing up to kick off the Venture Center, as it's called. Right. You're partnering with Fox Valley Tech?
I'm sorry, with Fox Valley Tech.
Yep.
Right.
And you know, maybe a little bit later we can address that a little bit. But I mean, you are working in concert with other organizations and agencies to help economic development in the community as well.
Right.
Right. Chancellor, you made a very pointed comment in the newspaper a couple of weeks ago. You said that in the state, education is taking a backseat to ideology, crass politics, and name-calling. Can you expand on that a little bit? That's
Oh, I think that was pretty much to the
well,
point.
what is the ideology that we're up against?
Well, I'm afraid
that we're taking a backseat
well,
to?
okay, just as an example, I'm very concerned that some of the lack of priority that we're getting in terms of the funding support and the investment in the state through the taxpayers' dollars are really being driven by ideological differences and disagreements. Now, it's a sensitive topic because I think universities need to be more sensitive to the sensibilities, the concerns of our external communities and our broader public. But the best example of this is people of difference of opinion, very deeply held about whether Ward Churchill should have been allowed to speak at UW-Whitewater, whether UW Stout was not wanting a ROTC program on their campus, and of course changed that position after they realized it was in violation of system policy. Whether management decisions are being properly made with regard to certain employees. And I want to be careful because I don't want to get involved in taking positions on specific cases.
Sure.
But when those are used to send a message to the UW institutions, and let's say, geez, it's I guess possible that a person like myself as a chancellor could make a mistake and I should be held accountable for that mistake. So what do? We cut UW-Oshkosh's budget, say, just pick a number, $10 million to punish the chancellor. Now, that doesn't, well, yeah,
Which
it's
is
a certain way to
what-
punish the
which
chancellor.
is what happened in Madison.
Yeah, well, basically, yeah, what it's doing is it's really hurting the students.
Yeah.
And you know, there are other ways of holding those accountable that you have concerns about that are responsible for certain decisions are made. So that's what I mean about ideology. Starting to drive how the whole system, the institution, and all the students and so on are treated, that's simply crass, for lack of a better word, I guess.
And what's frustrating to me is that I believe I'm correct about this. The majority of the state legislators in the Assembly and the Senate are UW grads.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And they graduated from the system when it was much less expensive than it is now.
Right.
And now they have no problem piling up costs after cost after cost. So I think there's a little hypocrisy there. And I agree with you. They'll take political issues and then find a way to punish essentially the student.
Now, understand, they don't think they're doing that. They think they're really getting at the administration, and they believe, and I quite frankly, I think some parts of the public do also believe, and we could talk a little bit about this, that there's plenty of administrative fat and bloat and inefficiencies in the UW system, so when they cut us, they think that and they direct where those cuts ought to go, that they're really protecting the students from all this bloat that's out there. Right. So again, I'm not here necessarily to make their case, but I'm just trying to better understand what is driving their understanding of our institution.
But one of the criticisms of the chancellors and the upper administration, President Riley and others, has been that you take these hits from the legislature, and then you essentially thank them for not being even worse. I mean, how do you respond to that? We get this all the time.
Well, for one thing, thank God, not everybody in the legislature has the UW institutions as their lowest priority, and there are people in there trying to help us. And so you get caught in all that. And you know, and they're just having a very difficult time these days in Madison. That there are different positions on where the priority should be within the legislature, within the Assembly, within the Senate, even within the Democrat and within the Republican parties. So there are people that have been helping us stave off. I mean, it's a crazy thing to feel that you've got to say thank you when someone prevents you from being cut even further.
Right. And
you sit there and say, wow, we stopped that, but you still got significantly cut. And then what happens is you get caught sometimes in the politics of this.
Yeah.
They'll say, well, why are you thanking them? They just cut you.
Right.
I'm talking about Democrat and Republican. You know, I talked to a Democrat legislator and he said, well, why are you thanking them? You talk to a Republican and said, why aren't you blaming the governor more?
Exactly.
And you were sitting here saying, I'm not blaming I'm blaming everybody if I'm blaming anybody.
Let me pursue this for
go
a
ahead.
second.
Go ahead.
I asked you on radio a few months ago if you thought that Kevin Riley, who's relatively new
Yes.
as president of the system, about a year,
Right.
I guess. I asked you if he was the right man for the job at this point. You said yes. You worked with him. He's very articulate. He's very bright. But he's been getting bashed by people who have supported the campus. Marlon Schneider, who's in the assembly, he's a Democrat.
Right.
He said in the Madison Capital Times, if this guy, talking about Riley, can't defend the need for higher education better than that, then maybe he should quit. And then he said, I'm a frequent critic of the university, and I can defend them better than that. I mean, what does it mean when someone like Schneider is attacking the system president like that?
It's just it's very unfortunate. I guess what my response would be, I think I've been amazed at how President Riley has kept his cool, has not overreacted. Some people may be critical of that. He's a very down-to-earth person. He was the Chancellor of the Extension throughout the state. He really got to know the state. He's crisscrossed the state. He's very thoughtful. He listens well. And we just got a lot of work to do to get out of this. And we're just kind of in this downspin right now where it seems like everybody thinks it's okay to take these kind of shots
but remember,
at UW System.
Remember about maybe this is what Schneider's getting at. Remember about 3 or 4 years ago when Scott McCallum was the interim governor, and he was proposing something like a $40 million cut.
Right.
And so I think it was Catherine Weil at that time, said, well, we're going to suspend admissions. We can't handle this.
Right.
Now, since McCallum left office, we have faced massive cuts beyond anything he could have imagined. I don't hear the chancellors or President Riley saying we're going to suspend admissions. Why not? It seemed to work at that time.
Well, it goes, and maybe, I mean, these are good questions, but it goes back to something I said earlier on the show here that I think a number of us, myself included, you don't want to put the students and their parents and supporters and so on in this position. I mean, you're trying to work these things out, and you shouldn't put students, I deeply believe this, even within the university, you shouldn't put students between your debates and discussions and your issues and your criticisms and hold them out as a negotiating chip. Some people argue, well, if you don't do that, you don't know how to play hardball, so in the end, you're really hurting them. But then you have to look at the context that we're in. This is no joke. This several $billion deficit we've been struggling with over this biennium and into the next one. So you have to be careful about how often you do things like that because of the cost it has on the other end. And I guess, Tony, part of maybe the lesson here is that these strategies don't work very well anyway. I mean, none of us like to be threatened and made to feel like we're responsible for everything going to hell, so to speak.
Right.
And you gotta say it like it is every once in a while, but you got to figure out how to build a more positive, proactive way of building back support for this case of the UW institutions. And we've got a lot of work to do. So I just don't believe now doing that kind of thing, freezing and closing admission. Now I got to admit, because I made the presentation about Regents last week, that I pointed out what would happen in terms of the reduction in enrollment if that 34 million never did come back. There is a point when you have to do those things and be honest about what's going on. But if you do that too often, there are costs associated with that, and it's not a particularly effective strategy at developing support. We just need to develop a lot more grassroots supports from the people of Wisconsin for the UW institutions, from our alums, and we just need to take the responsibility that we got to go back and build a base of support, and more credibility in what we're trying to do for the state, in the legislature, and with the governor, and with the public at large. I mean, we've got to admit we've got a problem here, and it's our responsibility to try to figure out how to work through it.
Cheryl?
What is the average tuition these days for an undergrad?
Well, the tuition and fees are a little over for a student taking anywhere from 12 to 18 hours for 2 semesters. So the annual tuition in an academic year in fees is a little over $4,000. And that'll go up to, I think, about $4,600 or something like that with some of these increases.
And other than student loans and possible grants and scholarships, what are the ways, if any other ways, that students foot this bill, other than mom and dad helping to pay it?
Yeah, and remember, we got grandmas and mom and dads that are also our students too.
Yeah.
And you know, a number of them, of course, have planned and they've saved over time. There are of course scholarships. There's funding support that comes through the UW-Oshkosh Foundation through the generous gifts of individuals to support scholarships. And of course, a big factor for a lot of our students is they're working. So they're holding 1 or 2 or part-time jobs and either going part-time or full-time at the same time as they go through. There is, you know, significant financial aid available. The problem is that depending on what happens at the federal level, a lot of that's being threatened too with the so-called Reauthorization of Higher Education Act. The problem with that is, since a number of us went to college, a lot of the financial aid is shifted from outright grants based upon your need and your family income to now loans. We'll lend you money, we'll give you a deal on the, on the interest, and so a lot of our students now are going out. The last statistic I saw on the average in Wisconsin is about $17,000 in debt for those students that are on financial aid. So they really depend on the financial aid,
Sure.
but they're supplementing it with work and support from friends and others, and that's basically the way they're doing it.
What are your students saying about these cuts that are coming?
Well, they're understandably very upset. They think and they feel it in some significant ways that they're clearly being asked to pay more for less. They are in many cases having to work longer, not take as many courses as they'd like to, because they got to figure out how to cover these. They are telling us that they or friends of theirs are stopping out. Hopefully that's all it is, not dropping out. And they are frustrated with everybody, with the regents, with the chancellors, with the legislature, with the governor, because that's who they see are accountable for the tuition increases. So the students, for example, the United Consuls, which is a group of students in Madison that advocate on behalf of the student, were allowed, which is a great credit to our board, for about 30 minutes to address the board before they made a decision with the tuition increase. They asked that the tuition be held at 3% each year. And they understand that if that happens, that in that case, if that got through, that'd be another roughly $50 million of cuts the institutions would have to take on. But their feeling is that's the state's responsibility. The state's backed away from that. So our board and the chancellor's another put in an impossible position, because we understand that the tuition keeps going up like it is, it hurts the access issue.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, if it goes down, then we got a $50 million hole. That scenario I just painted for you means they can't get the classes they need, so they end up staying longer and it costs them more. So it's a very complicated thing. But the students, I think, in large part, feel that we just aren't doing the job in this state to help them. They understand they have to fund part of their education. They just feel that the burden of that is being shifted much too much to them much too quickly.
And they're right. And a couple of faculty issues. And I should say we're taping this on July 14th. The governor has not yet decided what he's going to do with the budget that came out of the Joint Finance Committee and the Senate. So that could have all changed by the time you see this. But in the Senate version of the budget, faculty and staff would be required to contribute 1.5% of their salary to retirement accounts, and that would effectively cancel out whatever raise they're
talking about a 2% raise pool.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you anticipate that the governor would veto something like that?
Well, Tony, we had a meeting with the governor last week, the chancellors and the regents, and we raised what some of our major concerns were and where we would like to see him use his veto pen, and that was clearly one that we raised with him, and his response was quite good. He felt he needed to try to get that fixed and to veto that. He's got the challenge of finding some of the money to handle that particular veto, but I remain optimistic. He needs to hear from people that could get vetoed. Now, a little background quickly, because a lot of people would say, and I got emails from folks, and I sent all this information out to the campus, as well as some of our external folks, and got some people back saying, well, that doesn't sound unreasonable, 1.5% toward your pension retirement program. And maybe it wouldn't be if you weren't in the situation for now looking at a possibility of 4 years in a row with your average salary increase would be well under 0.5%.
That's right.
That now you have to add, because to your pension program. And I hear a lot of people say, well, in the private sector happen all the time, and then I'd say, well, the people are able to keep their jobs. Obviously a lot of people lost their jobs during this thing, and people didn't get to apply for jobs at UW-Oshkosh because we had to cut them out. Well, that's really the people you got to be concerned about. But those people that kept their jobs in the private or public sector, they like to compare us a lot to the private sector. How many of them can show me cases where they had less than 0.5% of a salary increase 4 years in a row? Not many.
Right.
And the same thing with local public sector employees. So that's the environment that we operate in, and that's why that's such a sensitive issue. And then one final point, our folks have done a heck of a job on the campus dealing with all these cuts. Doubling up on their work and just putting their noses down. It's a great Midwestern thing. You just keep working harder. Well, and you start worrying about people burning out and that type of thing. So I just think they deserve some recognition for maintaining the enrollment levels. We actually went up on our enrollment over the last 5 years rather significantly, and they hung in there and they did the right thing. And they protected the seats in the class. And now for them to be faced with yet another 2 years of really losing ground in terms of their purchasing power in some significant ways is just of great concern to us.
Well, over 200 faculty, as you know, on our campus signed a petition asking you and the provost to reconsider how we're allocating budget around here.
Right.
And my view is a lot of this is a product of what the legislature is doing. I mean, they're creating this bad blood on every campus. I mean, people are frustrated, they're angry at the things that we're describing here. But you did attend a meeting at which many of the people who signed the petition came, and I remember one assistant professor said, well, if this environment continues, why should I stay in the UW system? Right. I'd like to ask you that question now. Why, for faculty who are feeling that the system is going downhill, obviously in Madison they're not giving it the same sort of support they did 4 years ago. The long-term prognosis is not necessarily that good. Right. It might be, we hope. Right. What do you say to faculty?
Well, when that question was asked, basically my response was, well, one of the major reasons, it can't be the only reason that you want to stay committed to a place for your better part of your career, is the people. And I know some people didn't like that response, but I really meant it. I think that at UW-Oshkosh in particular, I don't live with the people in the other campuses, but I'm sure they're somewhat similar. They're not quite as good as our folks. It's just, it really is a good place. I mean, people argue with each other and debate and criticize and so on, but we just don't have a lot of really mean-spirited people. And people are helpful, and it's just a good environment to be around in. And trust me, I've been in a lot of different states and different institutions and so on, and this is the finest group of people I've ever been around. And I think that's important. That has to weigh in a person's decision of where you want to go to work every day. The people that you work with are the kind of people that you like, that you feel supportive, that are bright, that you're going to hang in there and get through. And then I want to be careful with this, but it's not like these problems are going on just in Wisconsin.
Yeah, they're worse in some states.
They're worse, they're a little better in some states, and we're right about the average, in some ways having a little more problem than the average. These problems will pass at some level, but we need to encourage people to not overreact, and that's what concerns me most. I mean, I want to be honest about certain aspects of things on our campus aren't as good quality as they were a few years ago. But there are a lot of other things that are actually better. And for us to kind of shoot ourselves in the foot and come and say, well, all these cuts is really harming the bottom line of the institution, it's going to hell in a handbasket, so to speak, that's overreaction. That's not really what's going on. But incrementally is what you worry about, that you're going to go down that path. And so I think it's very important that we not overstate the case, that as I said, it's still an outstanding institution, a great place to get education, where the faculty deeply care about the students, as do the staff.
Well, as you know, our alumni surveys of students always come out high.
They're glowing. Right.
So there's much to be proud of. It's just that in this political environment, we're afraid that we could really lose the quality. Right. One mistake that was made over 10 years, I know you're aware of this data, UW system spending increased, the figure I saw, only about 13% in the last 10 years. That's last in the Midwest.
Yes.
What were we doing in those 10 years? I mean, and those were some years of economic boom. That would have been the time to really get the system into shape, and we didn't do it.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the things that we were doing, and people said it was necessary to be done. I wasn't here, but we built a lot of prisons. So a lot on the capital side. That's one of the reasons the comprehensive institutions really are kind of behind in terms of finally we're starting to get some things that are bringing our facilities more up to speed. The decision was made to build a lot of prisons, and I believe it's very important that we protect the public and public safety and all that, but I think we can do a lot better job in terms of dealing with offenders and not having to incarcerate all of them in the highly expensive ways that we tend to do that. So that was one of the things that was happening, a major thing that was happening, and particularly related to the capital budget side of things, as well as competing for operating budget.
And common sense says if you've got an outstanding K through 12 system and an outstanding university system, your need for prisons declines dramatically. That's common sense.
And that you can do some things with corrections in helping continuing education. I know this is not popular, but
right. No, it's not.
It's a way of helping. It actually works in terms of reducing recidivism to put a lot more emphasis on continuing education, why people are incarcerated.
Sure.
As well. So those are some things I think that may have contributed to that situation.
Sure, Cheryl?
Well, as Tony mentioned before, we're taping this on the 14th of July. Obviously, this is the middle part of summer. Students are having to get enrolled for, the fall semester. That'll be starting here in a couple of months. When do you expect to know something about the 2005-2007 budget?
Well, within about 3 weeks, the governor will make up his mind in terms of the budget that he is going to have the state operate with, so to speak. I mean, there's lots of discussion. I don't have any particular insight, but I think most people believe that he's not going to veto the whole thing and bring them all back
right.
and have a do-over, so to speak. That he's going to do his level best to use his veto power to make the budget better where he can, and I think that's going to take him some time. So I don't think we're going to hear anything for 2 or 3 weeks, and I hope that happens. I hope that by August 1st, close to August 1st, a few days either side of that, we have a state budget so we can move forward. And that's the other point. It's not fun what we're having to deal with. We're hoping to get a number of these vetoes in there. We're still going to have a heck of a challenge, but it's pretty much over. So let's get to work and get back to focusing on what it is we have to do and do it as best we can. Hope the economy continues to improve. I'd love to see some kind of budget repair bill in the middle of the biennium, but I don't know. Given
you're losing your microphone there, Chancellor.
Okay, let me get it back here. I'm so sorry.
That's quite all right.
There we go.
But I don't think we'll see that kind of budget repair bill necessarily. But I think we need to get on with the business of trying to set up more for the longer term future. And I hope the governor, is able to do a lot of the vetoes that we need to allow us to, kind of struggle through and see if we can. Get everybody together, and that's what President Riley is promoting, that there be a commission.
Yeah, talk about that. President Riley wants a bipartisan commission on the future of the UW system. He says this commission should clarify what the state of Wisconsin wants from its public university and what the citizens are willing to support. What is he talking about there?
Right. Well, he's talking about a group that would have representation from the legislative leadership, that would have representation high as up possible from the governor's office, that would have some regents on it, that group would get together and address how are we going to develop bipartisan support for the kind of UW institutions we want for the future state. What kind of priority should it have? What do we expect from it? What can the state reasonably expect to invest in it? I hope it leads to conversations that come out of that say, well, here's some of the things that we can do differently that will help us get a larger number of people having access throughout their life to higher education UW institutions. And then the state says, well, here's what we can do. And then we say, well, if you can do that, we can do this over here. And you know, it may be a pipe dream, but it's very important in a university system that you develop bipartisan support. It really doesn't work in the long run to be ping-pong balled back and forth between the various parties or factions within the parties or the legislature and the governor, that we need to get the UW institutions in that position. And I think it's even more critical now than it's ever been, given where our economy needs to go. It is the knowledge economy, age of the knowledge economy, and so we've got to figure out how to get that done.
Do you think this commission will actually be created?
I think so. I don't know if to what extent it will look like what President Riley and the regents are asking. Okay. There is actually a call for it that the legislature made, a little different kind of configuration of who should be on it. That's a good sign. That got out of joint finance. And I think we'll see something. We've got to have something like that.
You're familiar with Bill Krause, I'm sure. He's the Madison pundit. He, back in the 60s, I guess, he was Lee Dreyfus's campaign manager.
Okay.
And Dreyfus was a chancellor before he became governor.
Yeah, right.
Should we ask him if he's going to run for governor? But Bill Krause wrote an article recently on why the UW is a 98-pound weakling. That's what he called us.
Oh,
and see what he said. Let me see what you think of what he says. Bill Krause, he's the dean of pundits down in Madison. He says UW is a political wimp. UW does not have a political action committee. UW does not mobilize its political allies. UW does not endorse its political friends or oppose its political enemies. When was the last time a candidate lost an election for not supporting UW? Or worse yet, because he or she actively opposed UW. You think he's being too cynical?
I wish I could say I thought he's being a bit too cynical, but he's in the right ballpark. I think how do you explain what's happening to us in terms of having as low priority as we do if it hasn't something to do with our lack of political and what I would call relationship effectiveness? Mm-hmm. And I do believe that it's very important on how that's done. It's not done in the traditional way. I mean, for example, this is my belief. It just is. I don't think chancellors should be personally, making political contributions to candidates. I don't think I should be giving money to this Democrat candidate or that Republican candidate or this Libertarian candidate. I think that's inappropriate given the nature of what a university is and a person in my position. On the other hand, I believe it's imperative that when elected officials do things for us, that we recognize and we thank them, because that's important to support our students and the mission of the institution. So in that sense, I think we have to be very clear about those people who we appreciate what they're doing for us. And I think we have to be effectively concerned or figure out how to bring the message to others that are doing things that appear to be, very harmful, so that they understand. So I guess I would agree. We clearly, relatively speaking, are not very politically effective. It's sad to have to say that. I feel, quite frankly, some personal accountability for that. I think that's part of what people expect of me as a chancellor, to be doing a better job, advocating for the priority for the UW.
Well, I think the key is what you suggested earlier, is to kind of go over the head of the legislature and go right to the people. The politicians respond to pressure from the population at large. Right. And sadly, we at the UW, administration, faculty, even our students, are not doing enough to let the average taxpayer on the street know what we do and then get them to advocate for us. and we have to do that.
Right, and that's our responsibility.
That's our responsibility to do that.
Others have responsibilities. Elected officials' responsibilities to really think about where the priorities should be. The governor does too, but we have our own accountability.
I mean, you'd think we could figure it out too. We have all these smart people walking around. It shouldn't be that difficult.
Well, maybe we're too smart for our own good.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
Well, given the fact that that you're not very politically involved as a university system, and facing continued budget cuts, I mean, gazing into your crystal ball then, Chancellor, do you see things like these deep cuts maybe serving as an impetus for the UW system to become a little bit more politically motivated?
I think so. I think we've basically hit rock bottom on this at a certain level, and I think that we're saying things like Tony just shared and I shared, that we have to do a better job advocating for what we deeply care about and we're passionate about. This is public good work. It's a vocation for most of us, and we have a greater responsibility to do a better job advocating, whether we're a faculty or an administrator, our alums. And I agree. I think we have to be more thoroughly connected with the public that fundamentally supports us. That's one of the reasons at UW-Oshkosh I keep hammering away that, our little motto is engaging people and ideas for common good, for public good, and that we want to be thoroughly involved with our regional communities and responsive to them and listen to them, even when it's hard sometimes to listen to them. So I think there's a lot that we've started to do on our own campus that is helping us. I surely hope people in Oshkosh and in Northeast Wisconsin believe that we're trying to be better neighbors, that we're trying to build upon all the wonderful things and do more that our faculty and students are already doing, that we're trying to listen better as to what the needs and the priority are from the people in the region. And I think to the extent that we do a lot better job of that, I agree with Tony, that grassroots support will be reflected in the priorities of the elected officials. And a number of them have told us that too.
That's correct.
It's human nature, I think, that people don't really get very involved. They're very apathetic until something hits them where they live, basically. For a lot of people in this community, they have no real ties, direct ties to the university, other than that it's here, and they live here too. What would you say to those people out there, Chancellor, to help them understand the situation and to motivate them to voice their concerns?
Well, I think first I would ask people to really think that through. I think you're right. I think there's some set of folks that would be very hard for them to see in any direct way of how the university impacts them positively. Even though we could say, well, you may or may not realize it, but part of the job you have or your neighbor has is because the institution, UW-Oshkosh, is here. It's clearly the most significant economic, social, educational, cultural entity in our community. And a lot of people probably don't realize that, but I think many people do. So I think people understanding that, here's another way to say it, and this is no slam at things that are going on, and a lot of that's beyond the control of our state and our region, where companies are, being relocated or bought up by national and international operations. UW-Oshkosh is going nowhere. We can't move. We can't be moved. Right. We are the people's economic, social, cultural engine. And that's a good thing, and so it needs to be valued. It's a wonderful thing that the community of Oshkosh is distinguished by having the state's third largest institution. But that doesn't give us any right to behave like somehow we need to be privileged and held to a lower standard of expectation in being involved with our community. So I think the more people understand that, and the more that we really want the folks in the community that don't see or have much of a connection with us to figure out how you might do that. Because there's value here. Enjoy your university more. I guess that's what I would say, Cheryl.
Yes. Okay. Have you taken a position on the so-called voter ID bill, which obviously would require people to present a photo ID, but students are saying that the bill as written might disenfranchise them because they change their addresses very frequently, and I guess the way the bill is written, your ID has to have your correct address on it. It's not good enough to show the driver's license you got when you were living in Brookfield.
Right.
Have you taken a position on this, or have you followed
Well, I have to admit I don't know the details of that very well. Generally, which is probably easy to say, whatever type of identification is required, it need to be such that it doesn't.
It should make it easier to vote.
Yeah, it should make it easier to vote, I guess is the way of saying it. And again, I think we're smart enough to figure out how to do that. Here's just another example. Maybe one of the things universities need to do more of, and legislators and others need to come to us more to help them do the research before they go out and draft these bills. So there's a lot of ways. We're not know-it-alls, but we know how to connect information. We know how to do research to get to their staffs and so on and say, well, here's the way it's been done. Here are the pros and cons of it, that type of thing. Because a lot of these things come out, and there's not a lot of initial thought given to them. And so this might be a case in point on how this could be developed in such a way that it wouldn't disenfranchise. It's not just students, there are other people in our society that move a lot. And, and it's important that they not be disenfranchised from being able to vote.
Speaking of our students, Cheryl, and a member of the community asked me to ask the Chancellor this, and I didn't know the answer. Would you happen to know if we currently have students that are serving in Iraq?
Yes.
UW-Oshkosh students that are in Iraq. How many do we have?
Don't stick me to it, but several dozen.
Several dozen.
Probably
They're
under 50.
Actually in Iraq right now.
20 some. Well, I can't. I'm not following it that closely. I occasionally send a letter to them, but yes, there are a couple dozen. I can't tell you exactly where they are right now, but there are a number of them in Iraq. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Cheryl?
We're down to about a minute and a half here, Chancellor, but just very briefly, the Venture Center that's starting up for folks who either have an existing business or are planning to start one. Can you just very quickly give an overview of what this is and how people can get involved in that?
Well, it's basically a collaboration between Fox Valley Technical College and UW-Oshkosh, specifically the College of Business, bringing together a set of programs and support that they already have to help people who are currently in business, particularly people who are in smaller businesses, or people, this one's a little more focused at helping people get started. You know, they may be people that are working for a large company that are always kind of interested, maybe I'd like to go off and develop my own business. So it's really designed to help engender not only support for that, but to engender more of the entrepreneurial spirit that goes back, unfortunately, 3 generations or more in Wisconsin that we desperately need now in the new economy. So it's really, so there's a lot of programming, to do more in our own programs for the students that come into Oshkosh or Fox Valley Tech to encourage them to be entrepreneurial and to think about as a goal of starting your own business. And someone told me that my generation, which I come from an entrepreneurial background, that my grandmother and mother started an Italian American restaurant, and my parents took over, and my thing was, I'm going to go work from some big organization. I'm not going to do all that. You know, that was way too hard, and so on. And we need to get back to more of that and grow our own again. And we have a great tradition here. We just kind of lost it a bit. So the Venture Center is designed to help do that type of thing and help people do business plans and things like that.
Very good. Chancellor, thanks so much for being
here.
Well,
thank you.
It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Tony, thank you. And as always, thanks to you for joining us and letting us into your homes this evening. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh. Boy, that just flew by.